attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Learning Lunch hosted by FormatApproved.com. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch title is EHR Ease of Use, Enabling Better Data Input and Output. This Learning Lunch is brought to you by Medical Mastermind, a leading provider of EHR software solutions. We're joined today by Michelle Boucher of Medical Mastermind. Michelle is the Vice President of Marketing for Medical Mastermind. She's a leading expert in high technology marketing who has more than 25 years of marketing and executive leadership experience in software, hardware, and consumer products. We're pleased to share her expertise with you today. Thank you for joining us, Michelle.
Thank you, Brian. It is great to be here again talking to your awesome audience.
All right. Well, we're going to get into the presentation in just a moment. But before we do that, I'll let the audience look at the questions for today. And then, to begin, we'd like to do a little interactive poll with you. So you should see here in just a moment the first polling question. We'd like to get a sense of who you are, and then we will share that with the audience as people vote. So go ahead and let us know who you are. If you're not one of the categories on this list, I suppose you can just leave it blank, and then we'll assume that you're in the other category. But I'll let this voting go for another 20-30 seconds while I just cover a quick housekeeping note here. Remember that you can ask questions of our presenter at any time during today's session by entering them into the chat area during the presentation. In the second half of our session, we'll address as many questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, answers to your submitted questions will be posted to our website, and we'll send those out via email link later in the week. All right, let's get a look at the poll here. All right, you can see, yeah, it's a little surprising to me that we've got so many educators on here, but that's great. And some vendors as well.
Good to know.
Yeah. All right, we're going to do one more polling question as we wait for some stragglers to show up, and I'll take care of a couple other housekeeping notes while we're doing it. Let's go ahead and do our second question. Just like to get an idea of what your EHR experience is. Now, for the educators, I'm not even sure if that's relevant for all of you folks, but for those of you who are in an environment that's using an EHR, have you been using it for a good while? Are you still on paper but looking into EHR? Are you new to EHR, thinking of switching? Never heard of an EHR before? So this will be quite a wild ride for you today, but please go ahead and answer that question. The other housekeeping note I was going to address is that all registered attendees of this session today are going to receive an email and later today or early tomorrow with links to both the slides and the recorded version of the session. So people often ask us, can I get a copy of these slides? And our presenter has built us very lively and engaging slides today. So rest assured that you will get a copy of those slides after the event. All right, let's take a quick look at who we have, or rather what the experience of people is with the EHR.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
Yeah, so most of the audience who participated in the poll have been using EHR for a while. All right, well,
That's great.
Let's go ahead and get into the main part of our presentation. So, Michelle, again, thank you for joining us. Let's talk, to begin with, about patient portals. How can patients better engage?
That's a great question. Would you do me just a quick favor, back up one?
Sure.
And I just want to address the audience for just a moment about how I'm positioning this presentation today. You know, as I thought about the title of the session, it really comes down to connecting doctors and patients through the EHR technology. And, you know, of course, data is only good if you use it productively, and the tools that we're going to talk about are going to allow you to do that. So I want to just suggest to you that we broaden the scope of how you think about EHRs today. So EHR is much more than a government-mandated method of getting from paper to electronic charts. The replacement of paper means, you know, far more wide-reaching benefits to doctors and patients. And the EHR is becoming more holistic in terms of points of access between the physician and their patients and the information that brings them together in the first place. It almost becomes sort of a type of medical life cycle system, if you will. So what do I mean by that? Well, let me tell you about my doctor. So my family doctor is completely electronic. From the minute you get there, you sign in on a tablet, and then that information goes into their practice management system. And then when I get into the exam room, the nurse uses a tablet to take all my vitals, and that dumps into the EHR, and then the doctor comes in, and he has his laptop with my information already loaded in. And then afterward, he electronically sends my prescriptions to my pharmacy and orders the lab from, he has a lab downstairs for my blood work. And then, a couple days later, I log into his portal, and all my data is right there, from the visit note to the prescription and my lab work. Everything is right there. So that medical life cycle is entirely dependent on the EHR and its usability. So more and more, we're going to rely on EHR-based functionality to see and manage our own personal health records, even though we're in the health industry. It affects us in both ways. And, the expectation is that any doctor will be able to connect to our health information regardless of whatever their specialty is or where they're located. So using an EHR connects the doctor and the patient like never before, which means the relationship between the patient and doctor doesn't have to be confined to what happens in the exam room and maybe a follow-up call, right? So EHRs are being looked to provide a broadening array of capabilities and integration with other technologies so that wherever you are, you and any provider you see will have access to the information necessary to provide the best possible standard of care. And we're going to show you some examples of that throughout the session.
Well, thanks for that introduction. I have to say that, sadly, my own doctor is not quite as advanced as yours is. There's none of that kind of interactive capability, and it's something that I've been asking them about, and they're all sort of on the verge of getting there, I think partly to comply with stage 2 of meaningful use, but they're not there at this point.
Right, and some of my other physicians are not. One is completely on paper. So you find that there's still this migration from the old way to the new way, but the anticipation of what you're going to be able to do in an EHR has really broadened, and that's what we're going to talk about today, the way that those different points of contact are going to be able to help. So we can go on. Perfect.
Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in then.
So how can patients better engage with their doctors is what you had asked, Brian, and that's a great question. I know a lot of folks have heard about patient portals. Many of you that are already on EHRs perhaps have them. A gentleman named Steve Wilkins has a great post in his blog called Mind the Gap, where he talks about patient portals and how it's not the technology, stupid. He says, physicians, hospitals, and other providers are being misled by industry pundits claiming that more health information technology like EMRs, PHRs, smartphone apps, and web portals is the key to great patient engagement, and it's not. So Steve goes on to point out that patients are already engaged with physicians before they even get to the doctor's office. They've already decided to talk to the doctor. They know what's bothering them. They've made an appointment. They got to the office, and they're thinking about what they're going to say to the doctor, so they are already engaged. The use of the patient portal is simply the vehicle or the tool that enables a more fluid relationship between the doctor and the patient. So Joanne Rode, she's CEO of a company called Axial Exchange, and they provide mobile applications to patients. And she says in a recent column, she says, there's this latent belief in the healthcare industry that it's too complicated. The patients won't understand it, and they're not going to do it. And our view is that's simply not true. Most people want to be well, and most people want to understand what's going on in their bodies. And if it's complicated but it pertains to them or useful, then they're going to learn about it. So with patient portals, the technology is not what will hold people back. We know how to order pizza from Domino's online already, so you know pretty much how to use most of the patient portal. But the portal does have to be easy and patient-centered. So patient-centered means that patients determine their own portal experience, and they can use portal applications to engage with the information most relevant to them. So if it just does basic stuff like paying a bill and making an appointment, people probably are not going to use it. So let's take a look at the portal experience. From here, we have a branded portal, which is important. It needs to look like your physician's office. If anyone feels like they're coming out of your practice and into a third-party solution, that's going to cause a disconnect between the reliability, the trust, and the willingness to proceed. especially with things like the heartbleed virus, and you never know who's got hold of your data, which,
Absolutely.
by the way, I know a lot of healthcare companies are putting out the word as to whether they're safe or have been compromised. We're safe. Our EHR is safe. So the portal needs to let them manage their own care, give them access to their records, and all of this deep information. So if we go to the next slide, this is what the inside of the portal looks like. And for the purposes of demonstration today, I'm using Medical Mastermind EHR and our portal. But many portals do this just as well. So here you have a lot of interactivity between the patient and the physician's records. So they need to enter their demographics, for example, their medical and social histories, their visit reasons, their review of systems, and any other information that is pertinent to why they're coming in. You can see that they've made an appointment time, and there's a reminder there. And if you owed any money or had an outstanding balance, this one happens to have a credit, which I've never had with my doctor, but you could make a payment right there as well. So the basics are there of what you would expect to have as a portal, but more importantly, all of the critical information is being entered in there by the patient. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see how that translates. Once you've filled everything in, keep going. The portal will populate. There it goes. And this is the EHR side. So the doctor sees everything the patient has already input into the system. And when they log back into their portal, from the patient side, go one more slide, they can see the results of their visit. So you can see the flow from where the patient has filled out the information prior to a visit. The doctor receives the information inside the EHR. So at this point, the visit has happened. The doctor has either made a diagnosis or ordered blood work or put the test results back up into the portal. And now when the patient goes back in, they can view their test results and visit outcomes. And because of the new interoperability with external resources, they can get more detailed information simply by clicking on any of the linked data in their chart. And all the data is linked to an external source. We use Medline. So if you follow that red arrow and you were the patient, this would be in your portal, and you would click on hip pain. Go ahead and go to the next slide if you would. That would take you to Medline Plus, and you can look up anything on the chart and get more information. So the doctor needs to provide the overall diagnosis and treatment, but the patient can learn more on their own about a particular condition or topic that's specific to them.
Well, that's great because, I'm sorry, Michelle, I was just going to add in there that, you know, people are going to look for information whether you sort of guide them in that search or not. So if they're just out Googling, you know, who knows what they're going to find, but if you can point them to a reputable source, people certainly would prefer to have, you know, vetted information. And so that's a great way of providing them with trusted sources on learning more about their conditions.
Great point. So there's a downside to this, if you will. Some doctors are not happy with this because it could lead to issues that wouldn't normally arise. So, for example, let's say after your visit, your chart now says that the patient is obese. Well, you know, somebody might take issue with that. And so, or let's say a diagnosis has been read by the patient, which causes a little anxiety before they really understand and the doctor has had a chance to explain it to the patient. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. It's almost like a little information is too much information, but yet you want access to better understand what's going on with your body. So this is the way that it's going, and I think it just drives more and better patient-doctor communication. So the takeaways for this are that the patient portal needs to be easy to use and provide functionality that patients really want to use. But physicians also have to participate in order for the patient to find value. So let me tell you a little bit more about my doctor who's all electronic. Well, the most critical part of a successful electronic office is to actually respond. So I used the portal after my last visit to request a referral. But the problem is I never heard back. So I would just encourage you to commit to communicating using the portal if you're going to offer it, because you've set an expectation of the patient that they're going to be able to get a response from you.
And ultimately, it's so much more efficient than the standard way things have been done, which is to sort of leave a message for the doctor that gets passed on, and then the doctor eventually calls you back, and you have to play phone tag sometimes. This makes so much more sense, and you're talking about secure, messaging, so that it's not
perfect.
There's not those HIPAA worries about it.
You're absolutely right, and that takes us right into our next subject.
All right, well, let's get into the direct secure messaging we were just talking about. How can doctors communicate securely? And to begin, we thought we would do another quick poll question. You see the picture on your screen there. What's wrong with the picture? We'd just like to get your take on it. Is it that someone's got coffee and they're putting their phones at danger?
Yeah, see, I went right to number 2.
Yeah, that would be my choice as well. The libations seem to have become diminished there.
How dare you let the wine glass...
Server, please. And then there's the third choice, which is that there's possible HIPAA violations. So make your choice. This poll's mostly just for fun, so we'll show our results. Let's see if our audience is on the ball here. And you can see that we really should have let them choose 2 and 3, but...
Yeah, the number 2s are right after my own heart. But yes, you're correct. You're all correct that this is a potential HIPAA violation. So EHRs, they're now providing secure messaging capabilities that go beyond normal email to allow safe and compliant PHI transmission. And listen, HIPAA violations of email compliance they're serious stuff. The penalties start at $100 and can reach up to $250,000 per violation, plus 10 years in prison. And repeat violations can get up to $1.5 million in fines in a single year. And that's not to mention the reputation and so on. So there's that big, huge, stick hanging over our head. And violations are not always evident, even if you're careful. So I'm going to relay a story to you written by an attorney named Stephen Harris. He's a healthcare attorney. And he says that even inadvertent exposure of a text message can be a violation. So he tells the story of when he and a doctor friend had dinner out, and the doctor received a text from the on-call physician about a patient's condition. And he responded and left the phone face up with the text showing. So if Mr. Harris viewed the information, that was a violation. But then he goes on. He says, in the next scenario, let's say the physician is home alone with no one else there to see the patient's healthcare information. So he explains this scenario appears to be safe, but a text message is stored on different servers, not just on the phones of the sender and the receiver. So if a hacker were to break into one of these servers and obtain those texts, this would constitute a security breach under HIPAA. And it doesn't matter that the hacker had no intention of obtaining a patient's health information and didn't even know what he or she was getting. It is a HIPAA violation.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and so he goes on. He says that, take that same physician again, but this time the physician leaves his or her cell phone, which contains a text message, with a patient's healthcare information at a restaurant. And so some good citizen picks it up, and in an effort to determine the phone's owner, sees the text message that contained a patient's health information. So even though that individual had no intention of viewing the patient's information, it's still a HIPAA violation because an unauthorized person viewed the patient's personal health care data. And so you are still liable, and you could still be fined.
And if you look at the posts of HIPAA violations, I believe it's more than half now involve the loss or theft of mobile devices, whether it's phones or laptops. That is a lot of how people are getting in trouble on HIPAA, is because they're losing that data through a mobile device.
Right. So let's talk about how EHR makes this simple for you to be in compliance. First, you need to kind of understand the basics of what a secure message is. Why is it so different from regular email? So what secure messaging is, it has to have 3 components. It has to be able to do identity validation, which means that it can tell that you are who you say you are. it has to offer encryption and data security, which means it encrypts messages from point A to point B, and it confirms the secure delivery of your message to the recipient. And then it has to document the delivery. So you have to have end-to-end proof that the entire message was delivered securely. So this kind of brings up a question, which is, what about if you're a physician and you're sending patients their medical information, but they use Gmail? So that's a great question, because, you know, Gmail isn't necessarily HIPAA compliant. Well, so here's the answer from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. As long as you, as the physician, are using a secure email system on your end, the HIPAA Omnibus rule says that if a patient asks you to send them information at a Gmail or Yahoo account, you need to tell them that their information is not secure, and if they still want the information sent to them, you must document your conversation and their approval. So the other cool thing that's happened is Google and Microsoft are not stupid. They actually are now offering to sign HIPAA compliant business associate agreements. And those BAAs will cover the Microsoft 365 applications like Outlook, as well as the Google applications like Gmail and Calendar, and Google Drive, and the Google Apps Vault services. So those are things that are now available to help protect you. And for Meaningful Use Stage 2, secure messaging is considered to be one of the most difficult criteria to achieve. So it goes much further than simple email sending, right? You have to incorporate text messaging from doctors to patients, emailing from mobile devices, and the ability to support image and document attachments from mobile devices and desktop computers. So you can go to the next slide, Brian, if you don't mind. So the takeaways really are kind of evident here. Whether or not you're meeting meaningful use, you've got to make sure your EHR supports integrated secure messaging, not only for your office email, but also for your cell phones and all your devices. So should patients give you permission, just be sure that you have to document that they've given you permission. So you have to be able to prove their agreement to receive their information over non-secure methods.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you know, I think the recent Ponemon survey found that something like 90% of medical organizations are now allowing bring your own device, you know, for people to have their own cell phones in the facility and be part of the network and everything. And that's something that people should think about a little bit as well in terms of sort of unsecured devices roaming around inside your network. Have you really thought through all the security implications of that as well?
Correct. And it will be a full requirement, whether it's for meaningful use or not, at some point anyway, for all EHRs to only do protected transmissions. So if your vendor doesn't have it yet, there are third-party direct messaging systems you can use. Ours happens to be built into our system, but one way or the other, you've got to make sure that that's in place for your office.
So let's talk a little bit about Blue Button. How can patient access and share their data?
Well, Blue Button is it's not new, but it is relatively new to EHR in terms of integration. So there's two ways that the Blue Button is accessed, and we're going to talk about both that and the Microsoft Health Vault. The Blue Button allows you to download your health information from your patient portal to your personal computer. So you can get as a patient, you can get your records from your physician, put it on your computer, and then upload it into a secure health vault, which is where the Microsoft Vault comes into play. So in January, the HL7 organization provided a transformation tool that turns data into this standard format, into Blue Button usable format, so that data can be shared between EHRs and the Blue Button initiative, which began with the VA. So many of you are aware of that. Many of you are aware how the VA made it simpler for people, for vets, to take their records from doctor to doctor. And so if you go to the next slide, the Health Vault enables a connected ecosystem that currently includes more than 300 applications and more than 80 connected health and fitness devices. So what you're downloading from your blue button, when it gets uploaded into the vault, there's a myriad type of data that the vault can accommodate. It can come in from hospitals, it can come in from laboratories. The cool thing is I wear one of those little iFit devices, and even that information can be uploaded to the Microsoft Vault. And so using Blue Button from a patient's perspective allows them to take all their data with them from all of these providers and put it in one place, and then it allows from the EHR side and the physician for them to use Blue Button to access the patient's health information. So really, I can explain it better. We can explain it better by watching a video. So let's take a look at how this works.
You want to go ahead and launch the video?
Yeah, go ahead and launch the video. Why not? There we go. You may have to turn your volume up.
Yeah, hold on here.
Maybe hold that mic right up to the computer. Well, we're going to give you guys the link so you can watch it.
Sorry about the sound difficulties there.
That's all right.
Maybe you can just summarize what we're watching for us there.
Sure. So this video, which is out on YouTube, is giving you an example of what the Vault is able to do and then how it connects with the Blue Button. So they're talking about this gentleman who is a ex-military, and he has some issues. And so it's going to explain that he has post-traumatic stress disorder, his depression, etc., high cholesterol, and they are trying to get a hold of how to manage his records across the different entities that he's seeing to take care of all these symptoms. And so the explanation goes on to talk about how he's using Health Vault to keep track of everything that's going on with him. And then they take the data out through this Blue Button, which is a secure transmission of that data down to your own computer system.
So there's been a lot of, I think, concern about health information exchange and interoperability and those related cluster of issues. But I think there's also really promising sort of advances in how people can go about doing these things.
Well, I think you hit a great topic. HIE has been, a challenge from the get-go for EHRs because they're all siloed. So by utilizing Blue Button and the Health Vault, and there are other Health Vaults as well, this just happens to be Microsoft's, it allows that sharing of data that was the whole intention behind electronic health records. Whether it was rolled out correctly or not rolled out correctly is really irrelevant at this point, but the Obamacare initiative that ties into this has ensured that at some point everybody will be able to share data as appropriate so that wherever you are, your health records go with you. And they do that by putting them in the cloud and then giving you easy access.
Yeah, it's funny that that's sort of always been the promise of EHRs, but it's been something that's been delayed in implementation because of what you're talking about with the siloing and everything. And now it seems like with Stage 2 we're finally getting to the point where it's really being realized, I think, for many people for the first time.
It's true. And it's interesting that it's happening outside of the EHR. So it's
Yes.
not the EHR's responsibility to make sure it operates across all EHR platforms. It's only responsible to operate towards these entities such as MS Health Vault that are the repositories for the data. Now, you've got to be in compliance with how that happens, but the good news is that even, as an EHR vendor, we don't have to worry about talking specifically to other EHRs to get the data to be shared.
Sure, and that, because the EHRs work differently, we would probably never be to the point where you can just seamlessly go from one EHR to another, and that may not even make sense. But the fact that the data sharing has gotten so much better is encouraging, I think.
Yeah, it's the way it has to go, because otherwise the entire system doesn't make sense.
So what are the takeaways then for this?
Well, your patients already may be aware of this service, this Blue Button service. They may or may not understand about the vault yet, but particularly if you're dealing with any type of Medicare, Medicaid folks who may or may not have been in the military or have family members in the military, they already know about Blue Button. And there's been a huge push to get Blue Button adopted across the EHR platforms. And the goal is for all EHRs to offer this as part of their patient portal and part of their system, because it encourages the whole adoption of technology and enables that HIE cross-communication so that the information is able to be properly shared.
And so for folks who want to learn more about the Blue Button and see the video that we tried to show there, rest assured that we're going to send out the slides after this event, and you'll be able to just click on the link and see the video that the audio did not work on here. So we apologize for that.
That's okay.
All right, let's talk about crosswalking and ICD-9 to ICD-10. How does an EHR help with that?
Oh, our favorite topic.
Yeah, everyone's favorite.
I purposefully did not put a poll question here.
Yeah.
Because I already know the answers. So, for those folks who are already well down the road to ICD-10 because of the prior deadline issue, everybody has been scrambling to make that October 2014 deadline, and all of a sudden, not so much, right? We got a little bit of a respite. But let's talk about GEMS before we get into that part of things. So what some people may not know is that the United States is one of the very last countries on earth to switch to the ICD-10 code set. There are 117 countries already using ICD-10, and they use it for a variety of things, mostly to report mortality data and as an indicator of health status. So according to HIMSS, the challenge for EHRs moving into the ICD-10 world, it exists with the workflow for assigning and ranking the diagnosis for the patient encounter, right? So that's where things like the GEMS cross-reference code set come into play. So what is GEMS? It's the General Equivalency Mapping Code Set that attempts to match the ICD-9 code to the ICD-10 code that's appropriate. So let's take a look at what the GEMS mapping looks like. Now, GEMS will map three different ways. It'll map one-to-one codes, one-to-many codes, or sorry, one to some, and then one-to-many. You can go ahead and bring that last one up. It's a little mind-blowing if you're not used to seeing what this looks like. So there's a total of 13,500 ICD-9 codes, but there's a total of 140,000 plus ICD-10 codes when you include the hospital codes. So all ICD-9 codes are listed in the GEMS crosswalk, and each one is matched to at least one equivalency for ICD-10. However, the challenge is that not all ICD-10 codes are going to match to an ICD-9 code. So the mappings don't take into consideration what's in the medical record, and the documentation may dictate an ICD-10 code that's different or more specific than the ICD-9 equivalent. So the GEMS are not a substitute for learning ICD-10. You still need to learn how the coding system is organized, but sometimes it's a little easier to just look up the ICD-10 code than it will be to use the GEMS mapping, unless, of course, your EHR provides more in-depth capability sets to allow you to map further and deeper into the ICD-10 code set. So you see where you have the one-to-one mapping, which is pretty easy, the one-to-a-few mapping, where you have, in ICD-10, it breaks out the poisoning by hormones into 16 or so different ways that you can document that. But the struggle is over there on the right, where you have the one-to-many, and there just is no straight mapping system. And if you can believe it, those are all actually ICD-10 codes for this one ICD-9 code.
Well, it makes perfect sense when you consider the fact that part of the whole purpose of going to ICD-10 is that it's going to be more specific. And so if you've got just by comparison a generic ICD-9 code, it's, when you map that to ICD-10, it's not always going to be a clean map. It couldn't possibly be. And that's where the more specific documentation by the provider comes in.
Absolutely right. And so, like with our solution, we have an enhanced version of the crosswalk that accommodates the selection of the right ICD-10 code regardless of how many you choose from. So it would be important to talk with your EHR vendor to find out if they're going to be able to provide any additional assistance in that area. And then I also just want to put in a shameless plug here for the wonderful ICD-10 courses that Format Approved offers, and suggest that at the end we're going to give you a link and a discount code so that you can take advantage of those courses should you need them. But
well, we appreciate that, and I would just add to that we've got two flavors for this very reason, that there's a course that's focused for coders because what they need to understand is sort of one dimension, and then there's also courses then for providers, and they're divided up by specialties because it's kind of a different situation for them. It's more focused on what the documentation requirements are.
Correct, correct. So let's wrap up this section here. Now, Carl Natali, who is the head of WEDI, which is Work Group for Electronic Data Interchange, he has a phenomenal blog. And so he's really addressing the elephant in the room, which is now that it's been delayed, should you wait, right? Well, he says that because ICD-10 is so complex that industry analysts and the AMA are advising doctors to continue the ICD-10 adoption now rather than to sit back and wait. And Becker's Hospital Review says you're going to need the ability to do dual coding for at least a year following implementation. So dual coding allows you to code in both 9 and 10 on one bill and lets the payer select the code format that they're processing under. So by the time the 2015 deadline arrives, all the providers are likely not going to be on ICD-10 even in 2015, which is why you still need dual coding. And so the takeaway is be sure your provider not only offers the Jemez crosswalk, but the ability to do dual coding. Look for additional ICD-10 help through test areas or additional crosswalk capabilities, or even through consultants that fill in where the Jemez mapping leaves off, and don't wait for 2015. I mean, why did they, if you think about it logically, if you're like sitting back going, oh, I have more time, I'm not going to deal with it till December. Why do you think everybody's in this position now? It's because there is not enough time. There's not enough time.
Precisely. So there's a delay, but that's partly because most people were behind. And so waiting because there's a delay kind of defeats the purpose of doing the delay.
Exactly. It's a little counterintuitive, but you need to keep going. Do not take your foot off the gas pedal on ICD-10. It will take longer, and it will cost more than you anticipate. So this extra year is going to help mitigate that.
All right, so let's talk a little bit now about mobile health. What role will mobile media play in the EHR?
You know, an EHR Intelligence article in January of this year showed that 51% of physicians regularly use tablets as mHealth tools, and the survey of more than 3,000 doctors found that nearly a third use tablets to read up on medical publications and watch webcasts or podcasts and so on. But another survey found that doctors gain more than an hour of productivity by using tablets, and 84% of physicians say that the devices make them more efficient and happier when they have to do paperwork and charting. So we want happy doctors. We want EHRs to be helpful rather than hindering your productivity. So these kind of tools will eventually integrate their data with the patient's online health information, which will be shared across the entire medical community of providers through stuff like the blue button and the health vault. You know, these are just more tools. And when we look back on the example of the doctor who left his cell phone out on the table, you know, those are the types of things that are going to have to be more in the forefront of how we think about mobile health. So that means that if you have your secure messaging, if you're HIPAA compliant, these tools can be extremely helpful in productivity. So, you know, doctors have unprecedented insight now into health and habits of their patients. And think about how that could benefit things like diagnosis and methods of care and saving lives. And I love the watch on the right-hand side. I think that's just the coolest thing ever. where the bottom of the watch actually monitors your health and your blood pressure and your pulse and so on. And then it transmits that data to, it can transmit that data to your doctor. So
yeah, and I'm sure we're just going to see, you know, there's already just an incredible proliferation of these mobile health devices, and I'm sure that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of how this is going to play out over the next few years.
exactly. It's just going to become the norm, and probably all these devices are, you know, they're all blending into one device. It's just a matter of what form factor you want. So the takeaway is, of course, your EHR should be device, platform, and browser agnostic, meaning it should work on your tablet, smartphone, not be dependent on operating system or whether you're using an Internet Explorer or Chrome. And I know some systems are a little picky about that, but ultimately the technology is going to have to adapt, to the way that physicians and patients are using EHR data and capability sets.
Absolutely, and here you see, you know, the sort of transition to cloud-based EHRs, that it just makes so much sense when you look at how people are using different portals to get access to the technology they need to use.
Correct. That's true.
All right, well, here's sort of the buzzword of the moment, or maybe it's been the last several moments, big data. How can EHRs use big data or contribute to big data to help save people's lives?
Well, I'm going to tell you 3 stories. Let's start with Dr. Aviato. Dr. Aviato is a colorectal surgeon. He has about 4,000 active patients. And based on the incidence of colorectal cancer in the country, he expects to see at least 2 cases in his practice per year. And this is an alarming statistic to him. And so he uses his EHR to monitor and increase the number of his patients who receive CRC screenings. So he says within the last 12 months, our rate of colorectal cancer screenings has gone from 40% to 52% for patients in the 50 and over range who need to have the testing done. So his system identified 200 patients from his patient list who were age 50 and older and who needed a CRC screening. And a mailing was sent out to all 200 patients, resulting in a response from 122 patients. Now, just as a marketer, that's insane. You never get more than 50% response to anything. So obviously he hit a nerve. So out of those 122 patients, he discovered that 49 had already had a CRC screening, and the EHR needed to be updated, which was interesting. And 73 were due for a screening, and of those 73, 65 people agreed to have the screening. So here's what gets interesting. There was one patient who was identified as needing a screening from the EHR patient list who elected to have the screening done, and he was found to have early stages of colorectal cancer. So this patient is now in treatment and is expected to make a full recovery thanks to the early detection brought on by the diligence of Dr. Aviato's staff and the EHR. His life was saved.
Well,
So
that's an incredible example, and it really demonstrates the power of the EHR, the way, sort of the goals that we've been working toward for a long time now.
Very true. So I know we're probably pressing on time, so let me get you through the next couple stories and we'll wrap up. I really want to share this information with you. So as probably everybody on this session knows, sepsis is disgusting. In fact, the images I wanted to use as examples were so gross I couldn't put them on.
We thank you for that.
I couldn't stand to look at them. So it's a really serious thing. So according to new research, EHRs can be used to predict the early stages of sepsis, which is one of the leading causes of death in the U.S., and it kills 215,000 people each year. So researchers at UC Davis found that routine health data, which is blood pressure, respiratory rate, temperature, white blood cell count, from the EHRs of hospitalized patients can detect the illness earlier in its infancy and help pinpoint which patients are at high risk of developing the disease. So they analyzed the EHRs of 741 sepsis patients, and they were also able to determine that just 3 measures can pinpoint the likelihood a patient will die from sepsis. Those levels are lactate level, blood pressure, and respiratory rate. So patients are hardly ever screened for blood lactate levels because sepsis is difficult to distinguish in its early stages, and the blood test also lacks specificity as if a patient were shown to have elevated lactate levels, this would not necessarily point to sepsis. So, so they say that the co-author of the study, Heen Nguyen, says finding a precise and quick way to determine which patients are at high risk of developing the disease is critically important. They wanted to see if EHRs could provide the foundation for knowing when aggressive diagnosis and treatment are needed and when they can be avoided. So they are now working at UC Davis on a specific sepsis risk algorithm that can be automatically calculated in the EHR. And they've already shown that it can be a powerful resource for identifying best practices in medicine and reducing patient mortality from sepsis. So this is a very important part of how people are using big data in EHR.
All right, well, let's look at the third example then.
Okay, so for the last story, we're going to go to Stanford. So a team at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford queried the hospital's records to weigh the pros and cons of a risky but potentially beneficial treatment that has not yet been evaluated in the medical literature. So Dr. Scott Sutherland said, this is the future of the electronic medical record, and I hope the future of a lot of clinical research, when he was talking about how they utilize their EMR. He says, our story is unique. It says, few hospitals have research capability built into their medical records. Although, as a side note, most EMRs that are in private practice can be used for research. It is possible to search the records. So in this case, a patient, they had a 13-year-old girl. She was admitted to the hospital with severe inflammation of kidneys and pancreas that had developed as a complication of lupus. Her condition is really rare in children, and no clinical trials or other medical literature addressed the best course of care for her unique situation. So the medical team, led by rheumatologist Jennifer Frankovich, realized the girl was at risk for blood clots that could cause organ failure or death. However, the anticoagulant drugs that would prevent blood clots would also increase the risk of bleeding from invasive medical procedures such as the kidney biopsy she needed. So Dr. Frankovich, who's also an instructor of pediatric rheumatology at Stanford, consulted her colleagues about what to do, and they said anticoagulation probably wasn't needed, but they had little evidence to back up their advice, and that really worried her. So the doctor says she was sick, and I felt like in the next 3 days we could make her a lot sicker or a lot better. So with such sparse information, she turned to the hospital's aggregate electronic medical record system. She examined patient data from 98 pediatric lupus patients who received care there. 10 patients had developed blood clots. So with a quick statistical analysis, she saw that the risk for blood clots was much higher in lupus patients with kidney and pancreatic inflammation. So extracting this information from paper charts would have taken months. But with the electronic tools, she completed the job in 4 hours and gave the patient an anticoagulant drug within 24 hours of her hospital admission. And according to her, she says, the electronic medical record should not just be a place to document data, but they should be actually learning from every patient that they're seeing, creating real-time knowledge databases. So the takeaways for this is that you can be using your own big data to look for trends, research symptoms, and review histories to help you determine best course of care. Keeping meticulous records in your EHR builds a valuable database that can be shared across your organization, and it can save lives, but you just have to use it. So there are a lot of good ways to use your own data in your own EMR to make these types of life-saving decisions.
And we're really just in the early stages of this, but it's, you know, kind of a lot of what we've been working toward for a long time. So it's certainly exciting to really see examples of how it can play out.
True. That's very true. So just to wrap up, I hope that you now have a bit of a different scope and perspective on how you're viewing EHR in terms of it being not just an electronic medical record repository, but in terms of it being really a medical life cycle management system, if you will. As EHRs progress, you know, into the future, they're going to be offering a lot more capability sets that are going to be become just critical, kind of like the fax machine. How did you ever do without it? Even though most people hate them when they first get them because the change is so dramatic, a good EMR is going to make medicine much, much better.
Yeah, and I think you've really shown very comprehensively how the EHR is so much more than just some digital record. It's really kind of the central, it's the hub for all of these important things that are happening in medicine. So it's been a great presentation.
Thank you.
If you want to contact Michelle Boucher, and we do have a little bit of time for questions, so we're going to get to those here in the time that we have remaining, but here is the contact information for our presenter today. Of course, we will be sending these slides out after the session, so you'll be able to grab it from there. But if you'd like to contact Michelle with any questions or comments you have, please feel free to do so. If you'd like to add anything to that, Michelle?
Well, I would just say that I'm available to discuss whatever part of this presentation you may want to press deeper into. I'm on Twitter. I'd like to say I'm on Facebook, but I really don't use it that much. But I do use Twitter. I know I'm forcing myself to use social media. At any rate, the Twitter handle is @MedMastermind, and I'd be happy to chat with anybody about these topics.
All right, well, here's our final slide. I'm going to go over some of how you can get that discount that Michelle talked about in our last couple of minutes. But before we do that, let's do a quick poll, and then we'll get to some of your questions. First of all, we'd just like to know what you thought of today's session. So do take a moment to vote if you could while I queue up our questions for the time we have remaining. We've got some great questions already from the audience about patient engagement and similar subjects. So I've got some of these questions queued up, and I'll share them with our presenter. And then again, if we don't get to any of your questions, we will have the written responses to those in the follow-up. So let's go ahead and look at the results here. It looks like people were pleased with the presentation there, Michelle, so good job on that front.
Well, I'm really glad that nobody wanted to go out to lunch instead of studying today. So I really appreciate that. I also just wanted to offer that the links that I used to gather some of this data, I'm going to make all those available to you, Brian. So if you want to push those out, people can dig deeper as well and look into some of the research that's out there.
We certainly will share those with our audience as well. Oops, hold on there. All right, let's go. We do have a little bit of time for questions, so let's ask a couple in the time we have remaining. This question is about patient engagement, and the question is, the questioner, the audience member, agrees that most patients in the U.S. are fairly comfortable with technology, but a few hospitals have a unique patient population of underserved patients who are not engaged. Do you have suggestions on how to engage those patients and meet the thresholds for safety net hospitals, for example?
You know, that's a question that we struggle with not just in hospitals but across private practice as well, is that you're going to have a percentage of the population that just will not do it, and that's okay. You know, my recommendation for that and what I tell our clients is, look, if it's critical that those patients have some access or use access to technology in order to manage their health within the context of that facility, then just have a family member do it who has permission and access, because there are just some folks who are never going to do it. Now, for meaningful use too, you know, you only need to get 5% of the folks engaged. That is, it doesn't seem like a hard thing to do, and certainly EHRs are making that easier. But if they're like, you know, if you're treating geriatrics, right? If you're in geriatrics and you are trying to meet meaningful use, it could be real challenging to get those folks to hop online and actually interact. But they don't have to do much. They can do as little as send a message, and that constitutes interaction online. Now, in a hospital setting, I'm going to admit I don't work with hospitals, so I may not be the best person to address the specific issues of hospitals, but I will again just defer to the fact that engaging a family member who is involved in the care of that person would probably be one way to go that you would get more success.
And of course, so much of this also depends on educating the patients about what's available, because, you know, having them sign up in the office, again, I'm more familiar with the ambulatory space than hospitals, but having them sign up in the office and understand that it's relatively easy to use, that can be just getting over that hurdle can be a big step. So some of those simple patient education steps can help, I think.
That's a great suggestion. Do it with them the first time and show them how easy it is so that it removes the fear factor.
Absolutely.
Great idea.
All right, well, let's ask another question. This one makes me smile to myself a little bit because for people who are a little nervous about ICD-10, there's always SNOMED, which makes ICD-10 look simple. And then the question is, can you tell us how you're taking not just the ICD-9 mapping to ICD-10, but also how you're integrating SNOMED codes for the patient's problem list?
You know, I would tell you that I would have to answer that question via email, only because, again, I'm marketing, and sometimes they just don't tell me these these driven details.
I was going to say, it's kind of a technical question.
It is a technical question, and I'm happy to get that. My guys down in my tech department have that all figured out already. So I would love to give you that answer as part of the response when we send out the link, because I think I can do a much better job that way.
All right. Well, that is certainly something we'll send out in the written responses. Okay. Here's a question about HIPAA and mobile devices. The use of mobile devices are being advocated with the EMR, but it has to be HIPAA compliant. How do you feel that using mobile devices that are HIPAA compliant is any better than using the portal system that we have used for decades? I'm not sure exactly what she may mean about the portal. Oh, the postal system, that's what it is. The postal, that makes more sense to me. I was like, you've used a portal system for decades? Okay, so the question is, how is it really an improvement to move to mobile devices when we've been able to mail things?
Right, right. Well, you know, that's kind of a good question, because you would figure mail has always been very secure, right? And it is. But you have to be where your patients are. And I know that in this 140-character world that we live in, information is expected to be more instantaneously available, more spontaneous. And mobile devices, look, let's face it, a lot of physicians prefer using their phone because it is a lot less time-consuming. It's a lot less expensive than using paper. You know, we still have the requirement of paper EOBs, which I don't anticipate going away soon, but at some point. So there is a place and time for paper. Just in the efficiency factor alone, mobile devices are going to be the tool of choice. And here's the thing. You know, we were talking a little bit before about my one physician who's completely electronic, and my other physician, and yours as well, Brian, who is still all paper. At a certain tipping point, you look at the physicians who are not participating in electronic health records or mobile device communication or tablet usage, and you have to think to yourself, how far behind are they? Because technology is moving on, right? The industry is moving forward with technology by embracing it and using it. If your physician is not, maybe that physician is getting ready to retire. Maybe that physician, I'm thinking to myself, is a little out of date in other areas, and do I really have the same trust level that I did before? So beyond the immediate use of a cell phone, it really just goes part and parcel with how electronic the entire industry of healthcare is, and that those tools are going to be just natural, you know, go-to methods for communicating.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think for a lot of patients out there, myself included, I'm irritated when my doctor wants to send me something in the mail because it's slow. You know, what I want is electronic access to things. So I think there's going to be an increasing expectation for many consumers and patients to have this digital access to their data.
And I think one of the bigger challenges is how many portals are people going to have to log into to get all their stuff, right? So let's say you have a chronic condition and maybe you see 3 or 4 physicians on an ongoing basis or over the course of a long illness. So each one has its own portal. The hospital might have a portal. The specialists might have a portal. Your family physician might have a portal. So after a while, having access to your medical records, you're going to want to have it be all in one place and accessible any way that you want it. So that's why things like Blue Button and the Microsoft Health Vault, you can get to them from any device you want to, and you can get the information from any doctor that you want to. So I know that dovetails a little off that question, but
no, it's a great point though, because we're already in modern life getting to the point where we have password overload and all these other things, you know, where Well, I'm afraid we are out of time. We didn't get to all of our questions, but as I was saying before, we're going to take all of those, send them on to Michelle, and we'll include those in the various resources we're going to send out in the follow-up to today's session, along with a video recording. You'll be able to see the slides as well and review that blue button video. So do watch your email inbox for that. If you don't see it by tomorrow, you may check your junk mail. Sometimes these things get filtered. I'd like to also mention quickly that we're pleased to partner here at Format Approved with Medical Mastermind to offer ICD-10 meaningful use and other HIT training. If you'd like to learn more about these offerings, please visit the URL there on your screen at medicalmastermind.com. If you use the discount code MM20 during checkout, you can get a 20% discount off of the retail price. I'd like to thank you, Michelle, again for joining us. Really great session. Obviously, the audience loved it, and I certainly found it enlightening.
Oh, it was my pleasure. This is a great topic.
Remember, to learn more about Medical Mastermind, you can visit www.medicalmastermind.com. I'd like to thank all of our attendees. Remember that you will receive the slides and video recording of this session. You can visit formatapproved.com to learn more about our upcoming learning lunches. There's a button there with our learning lunch lunchbox. You can click on that to see our entire slate of upcoming webinars. Keep an eye on your email box and our homepage for other topics. And thank you again for joining us today.